Hello everyone, I'm Justin, and this is a full recap of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles trilogy released from 1990 to 1993. If you end up enjoying this video and want to see more from us, then make sure to click that subscribe button and click the bell to know anytime we upload a new video. Over the last 35 plus years, there have been about 15 Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle projects made for TV and film, with the Turtles' first theatrical appearance coming in 1990 with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, that went on to earn $202 million worldwide at the box office on a budget of $13.5 million, and led to the release of two sequels titled Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2: The Secret of the Ooze and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3. Although these films didn't perform nearly as well financially, with Secret of the Ooze bringing in only $78 million on a $25 million budget, and TMNT 3 making $42 million on a $21 million budget. So, for the next 14 years following the third film, the Turtles were only seen on television and in comics until the release of the computer-animated TMNT in 2007. Which seemed to serve as a sort of loose sequel to the original trilogy, but although TMNT did perform a bit better than the last two theatrical releases, it wasn't by much, as it only made $95 million on a $35 million budget. So, we then had to wait again until 2014 for another TMNT film, this time once again in live action, with the Turtles themselves being created with CGI in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which became by far the most successful TMNT movie, racking in $490 million on a budget of $125 million, resulting in a sequel being released 2 years later in 2016 titled Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Out of the Shadows. But despite having a bit of a larger budget at $135 million, the sequel would go on to make over $240 million less than its predecessor. And really, there hasn't been a TMNT film released in theaters that was enjoyed by a majority of the audience since the original one in 1990. But hopefully that'll change soon with the franchise's newest installment, the animated Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem, releasing August 2nd. Before the release of the new film though, we've decided to take a look back at the previous Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle franchises, starting today with the original 90s trilogy, which you should go check out if you haven't already, as it'll be linked in the description below so you can enjoy it for yourself. But if you have seen it and are just looking for a quick refresher, then you've come to the right place. The franchise opens in New York City with a news broadcast from reporter April O'Neil covering the recent silent wave of crime, as what appears to be an organized group of supposedly teenage criminals have been robbing people in stores of their money and belongings without leaving a single eyewitness to identify them. And later that night, as she's making her way home from work, April nearly becomes one of the thieves' next victims. But fortunately, before they can take anything from or harm her, a sigh is suddenly thrown at a streetlight, leaving the teens in complete darkness as they're each taken down and tied up before the cops arrive to offer April some assistance, who finds the sigh laying on the ground beside her and decides to put it in her purse for now. We're then taken down into the sewers, where it's revealed that the group that had just taken down those thieves were the four Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: Leonardo, Michelangelo, Donatello, and Raphael, the latter of whom had thrown the sigh earlier, which he's pretty upset about losing, and he expresses his distress to their master, a mutant rat named Splinter. But Splinter implores him to let it go, so Raph instead attempts to calm himself down by heading off to see a movie disguised in a trench coat and hat, while his brothers celebrate their victory with some pizza. Following the movie, he witnesses a couple of teenagers steal a woman's purse, so he knocks them to the ground and returns it to her, prompting the teens to flee. But just as they get away from Raph, they're ambushed by a masked vigilante named Casey Jones, whose way of doing things Raphael doesn't seem to be a fan of, so he knocks him to the ground as well, allowing the teens to escape and prompting Casey to unleash an attack on him instead, which ends with Raph being whacked with a cricket bat into a trash can. The following morning, we meet back up with April O'Neil, as she's met at her apartment by her boss, Charles Pennington, along with his son, Danny, to discuss her interview with NYPD Chief Stearns later that day, and ask her to take it easy on Stearns, but she chooses not to listen and aggressively questions him about the organized crime in NYC and if he believes it to be the doing of the Foot Clan, a criminal organization that supposedly operated in Japan years ago as similar crimes took place, but he declines to comment on the clan as he doesn't believe it exists and appears visibly frustrated. This interview is actually seen by the Turtles from within the sewers, and Raphael, upon recognizing her to be the same reporter who took his sigh, heads off to recollect it. Before he can catch up to her though, she's first found by foot ninjas, who swiftly knock her out, but fortunately, they're prevented from harming her any further by Raph, who unleashes an attack of his own onto them before scooping April up and taking her down to their base. although, unbeknownst to him, he's followed down there by one of the foot ninjas, who, upon locating their home, then reunites with and informs his fellow soldiers of his discovery. Upon awakening, she's initially pretty frightened by the giant talking animals surrounding her, but she slowly calms down as Splinter explains how they came to be, revealing that they've spent the last 15 years living down here, but prior to that, he was the pet of his master, Hamato Yoshi, a ninja whose movements he'd mimic from within his cage to become a master of the art of ninja. At some point though, they were forced to come to New York, where he eventually found himself without a home, wandering the sewers and scavenging for whatever he could find. Before one day, he came upon 4 baby turtles crawling in some strange glowing ooze from a broken canister. So he gathered them up in an old coffee can, and when he awoke the next morning, was shocked to learn that they had doubled in size. He himself was also growing, particularly in intellect. So as they all grew older, smarter, and stronger, he began teaching them all that he had learned from his master, and raised them as his own. Once April's back to 100%, the turtles then bring her back to her apartment, and are promptly invited inside for some frozen pizza and a chance to get to know her better, which goes very well. But things take a sudden turn for the worst when they return home, as they find the place a wreck and Splinter gone. So they head back to April's house and stay the night with her as they try to figure out what to do next. Just moments after awakening the next morning, April's again met at her home by her boss, who's once again brought his son along, and he's arrived to again try and warn her about taking it easy on Chief Stearns during her TV appearance today. Although this time, it seems there will be harsher ramifications if she decides not to listen. As earlier, we saw that Danny had actually gotten himself arrested for stealing, and now Stearns is looking to use that to force Charles into shutting her up. But despite his warning, it doesn't seem that April plans on listening. Throughout Charles's discussion at her apartment, the turtles managed to find a place to hide out of sight. But for a short moment, Mikey allowed himself to be seen by Danny, who we soon learn is a member of the Foot Clan, along with many other troubled teens throughout the city who've been training under Master Tatsu to become ninja warriors for the clan's leader, Shredder, who during a meeting to set the clan's focus onto their new turtle enemies, Danny informs of the turtles' location. The turtles, meanwhile, are still at April's apartment, awaiting her return so she can hopefully help lead them to the Foot Clan. But after a while, Raphael grows frustrated with waiting and goes to blow off some steam on the roof, where, from across the way on another rooftop, he's seen by Casey Jones. And Casey also, from afar, witnesses as Raph is suddenly jumped by a group of foot ninjas. The other turtles are unaware of the attack for a while, unfortunately, as they're too busy being given a tour from the now jobless April of the antique shop she lives above. But they eventually realize what's going on when the ninjas and Raph come crashing through the ceiling, so they promptly unleash an attack in retaliation, during which we see the 3 other turtles show off their signature weapons, with Mikey's being nunchucks, Donatello's being a bow staff, and Leonardo's being a katana. As the fight wears on, more and more foot ninjas enter the building, including Master Tatsu, and the turtles soon become overwhelmed. But they're ultimately able to come out on top thanks to the help of Casey Jones, with whom they and April eventually manage to escape the building alongside. In need of a safe place to stay, the group then travels over to April's family's old farmhouse, and after being stuck there together for a while, April and Casey start to grow a liking towards one another. The turtles, though, are still struggling to figure out how they're gonna find Splinter. That is, at least, until, while meditating one night, they manage to have a telepathic encounter with him, communicating from the Foot Clan's base. And this brings them to finally return to New York. Once back, they head back down to their base in the sewers, where they find Danny hiding, as he, after outing them to Shredder earlier and watching as the clan destroyed April's home, began to feel some remorse and decided he no longer wanted to be a part of the Foot. So, since he didn't want to go back home to his father, as he feels he doesn't care about him, he came down here instead. The group and Danny then head to sleep to get some rest before they go find Splinter the next morning. But in the middle of the night, Danny decides to leave and return to the Foot Clan's hideout, which he's seen doing by Casey, who follows him there. And once there, Danny goes to speak with Splinter to learn the truth about the Foot Clan. So Splinter explains to him his past with his master Yoshi, one of Japan's finest shadow warriors whose only rival was a man named Oroku Saki, against whom Yoshi not only fought in combat, but also for the love of a woman, Ting Shen. Shen ultimately decided that she was in love with Yoshi though, and persuaded him to flee together to America. But before they could, Saki intercepted and killed them both in his home, right in front of a young Splinter. who leapt onto and scratched into Saki's face in retaliation, resulting in Saki slicing his ear off before exiting. For many years, Splinter was unsure of whatever happened to Saki, but he's now realized that he and the Foot Clan share the same symbol, and reveals to Danny that the clan's leader Shredder and Saki are one and the same. Following this revelation, Shredder interrupts and confronts Danny about his recent disappearance, before discovering a drawing of the Turtles in his back pocket and believing they've returned to town, sending his soldiers over to their base to take them out. Meanwhile, Tatsu's ordered to kill Splinter, but his attempt is fortunately thwarted by Casey Jones, who manages to knock him out with a golf club, before carrying Splinter out of the building with Danny. And back within the sewers, we see that the Turtles were able to see the Foot Ninjas' attack coming, so they easily gain the upper hand in their brawl to the point that the ninjas attempt to run away, but they still end up getting knocked out for their efforts. The Turtles don't have much of a chance to celebrate this victory though, as Shredder immediately makes his arrival and proves himself to be a force unlike anything they've faced before, with him managing to maintain control against and nearly kill the four of them, but he's fortunately prevented from doing so by Splinter, who calls Saki out by name and reveals that he was the same rat who scarred him, prompting Saki to rush him with his sword, which in turn allows Splinter, using Mikey's nunchucks, to send Shredder flying off the rooftop they'd been fighting on and down into a garbage truck, which Casey then turns on to crush and kill him. Police vehicles and news vans then arrive on the scene, one of which we see Charles emerge from, who Danny promptly runs into the arms of and makes amends with, before Charles then meets back up with April and offers her job back so she can cover this story for him, and she accepts. So, after finally sharing a kiss with Casey, she returns to reporting, while the Turtles celebrate their victory and reunion with Splinter. Following their win against the Foot Clan, the Turtles and Splinter spend some time living with April whilst looking for a new home, as they're worried that whatever's left of the Foot may come after them if they return to their base in the sewers. But April's apartment seems to be working out just fine for now, as it allows them to order as much pizza as they want. One night though, their pizza delivery takes a bit longer than usual, as the delivery boy carrying their pies, named Kino, is turned off course upon noticing a band of robbers stealing from a nearby store, who he attempts to stop by unleashing a martial arts attack on them, but when the group turns out to be larger than he'd expected, he ends up having to be saved by the Turtles, who easily dispatch of the criminals before leaving with their pizzas. Moving ahead to the following day now, as April covers the efforts of Techno Global Research Industries, or TGRI, to clean up waste that's resulted from their experiments, with her specifically interviewing TGRI's spokesman, Professor Jordan Perry. TGRI's motivations don't seem to just be for the betterment of their community like the professor claims though, as we see that they're actually attempting to rid of one particularly toxic substance that has proven to be capable of causing mutation, as it's done to a batch of nearby dandelions, which have grown much larger than normal. Unbeknownst to the TGRI workers though, the dandelions end up being seen by an outsider, with that outsider being April's cameraman, Freddy, who it turns out is actually an undercover spy of the Foot Clan. Earlier, we saw the remaining Foot Ninjas, as well as Master Tatsu, reconvene at their fallback hideout near a junkyard, which turned out to be the same junkyard Shredder's body had been laying within, as we see him suddenly emerge from beneath the trash. So upon regaining consciousness, Shredder returned to their hideout and retook command of the clan, before ordering Freddy to follow April, who now meets back up with Shredder and informs him of his discovery, who then sends his men to travel to TGRI's laboratory, inside of which we see Professor Perry disposing of the last of the substance. But before he can rid of the final canister, he's kidnapped by the Foot. Meanwhile, back at April's apartment, she and the Turtles are called to meet on the rooftop by Splinter, who takes this opportunity to reveal that he's still in possession of the canister that had contained the ooze that mutated them, since he's now learned, after watching April's interview earlier, that the ooze had came from TGRI's lab. So he sends the Turtles to try and figure out what they were really up to today. Upon arriving at the laboratory though, they're soon ambushed by the Foot Ninjas and Tatsu, who the Turtles attempt to take the ooze from throughout their brawl, but they ultimately fail and allow their enemies to escape. Now aware that the Foot Clan is operating once again, the Turtles decide to move back down into the sewers to avoid putting April in harm's way. But just as they go to do that, they're interrupted by a knock at the door and the arrival of the pizza delivery boy from earlier, Kino, who was originally supposed to deliver some pizza to a guy a few doors down. But since he wasn't answering, he decided to bring the pie to April instead, since she's always ordering anyway. and shortly after entering the apartment, he catches a glimpse of one of the turtles' feet and promptly stomps on it, leading them all to come out of hiding, including Splinter, which results in Kino fainting. When he awakens, Splinter explains to him their history, as he did with April previously, as well as their current fight against the Foot, which Kino offers to help them with by getting the Foot to recruit him so he can lure them out. But the only one who goes for his idea is Raphael, while the others believe he should just return home. Once he's gone, the turtles then begin making their way back down through the sewers, and end up stumbling upon an abandoned subway station, which they quickly transform into their new hideout. But Raph doesn't stick around for long, as he feels that staying down here is just allowing Shredder more time to use the Ooze. So he heads back up to the surface on his own and meets up with Kino so they can move ahead with his plan. The plan quickly falls through though, and although Kino manages to escape, Raph ends up captured and tied up on their base. So Kino immediately rushes over to April's apartment and informs her of what happened, which she then fills the others in on, and they then head over to the Foot's headquarters to rescue him, which proves to be more difficult than they were expecting, as Shredder unleashes two new mutant monsters onto them, an alligator snapping turtle known as Toka, and a wolf known as Razor, that he created using the Ooze and with the help of a reluctant and frightened Professor Perry. And Shredder's two monsters, despite having the intellect of infants, proved to be incredibly powerful, with them launching the turtles all over the place and ultimately forcing them to bail back to their new base. Although, before they escape, they also free Professor Perry and take him with them. Once back home, Perry reveals to the turtles that he could actually make an antimutagen that will return Toka and Razor to their original form and remove them as a threat. So he, with Donatello's help, gets started with that, while the others await its completion with some pizza brought by Kino, and once it's finished, they again go to confront Shredder and his army, this time at a construction site that they soon realize is right next to a Vanilla Ice concert, which their brawl inadvertently interrupts, but results in the artist improvising a new song called Ninja Rap, that he sings as the turtles fight off Toka and Razor, before eventually forcing them to ingest the antimutagen, rendering them ineffective. Their dance celebration of this victory is quickly interrupted by Shredder though, still in possession of the last canister of Ooze. But it's fortunately knocked out of his hands by Kino and back into Professor Perry's, before Shredder's then sent flying through the wall and out the building by the turtles with the use of a sound amplifier and a keytar. This victory is again short-lived though, as it turns out that Shredder was still in possession of a small vial of Ooze, which he's now consumed to transform himself into Super Shredder, who the turtles soon encounter beneath the dock, and who attempts to crush and defeat them once and for all by destroying the dock's supports. But the only one who ends up getting crushed by the rubble is Shredder, as the turtles manage to avoid death by leaping into the water. So with that, the Shredder is finally defeated, giving the turtles a little reason to return to the surface much at all over the next couple years. And they instead continue to spend their time training and eating pizza, while April has made plans for herself to go on a little vacation. So, before she leaves, she stops by their base to leave them with some gifts she bought at the flea market, where they're gifting Mikey an old lamp, Donatello a broken radio to fix, Leonardo a book about swords, and Raph a fedora. And she also brings an ancient Japanese scepter for Splinter. Although, before she can present him with it, the scepter strangely lights up and begins shooting out bolts of lightning, before it suddenly transports her elsewhere and replaces her with a Japanese man named Kenshin, who we soon learn is from the past. Before being transported here, Kenshin had just been captured by his father, Japanese daimyo Lord Norinaga, in 1603 Japan, after he'd attempted to flee home to meet with his love, Mitsu, who also happened to be the leader of the Japanese rebellion against Norinaga. But as Norinaga was scolding his son for disgracing their family name, their argument was interrupted by an English weapons dealer named Walker, who'd arrived to discuss the terms of his and Norinaga's planned exchange of valuables. So Kenshin was ordered to wait in the temple, where he eventually stumbled upon the same scepter April had brought for Splinter, and he began reading off its inscription, "Open wide the gates of time," resulting in it suddenly transporting him to the future and April to the past, although their outfits remain in their respective timelines. Upon arriving in the future, Kenshin is at first frightened by the turtles and Splinter, as he believes the turtles to be demons, but he pretty quickly calms down and is able to help them figure out what just happened, as well as come to the conclusion that, in order to save April, the turtles are going to have to use the scepter to travel back in time as well. They decide that while they're gone though, they're gonna need someone to keep an eye on Kenshin and whoever else ends up getting transported to the present as a result of them heading to the past, so they call up Casey Jones for his help, and once he's arrived, they move ahead with their travel through time. which results in them replacing 4 of Norinaga's honor guards who had been in the midst of a battle on horseback, and in turn transporting them to the future. Unfortunately though, shortly following their arrival, Mikey gets split up from his brothers, leading to him being knocked out and captured by Mitsu and her people, who also collect the scepter, while the other turtles soon manage to find April locked up in a cage and free her as they fight off a bunch of Norinaga's guards before escaping underground, along with another prisoner who'd been locked up for attempting to start a mutiny against Walker and who for some reason looks exactly like an older Casey Jones named Mr. Witt, after he'd managed to convince April to help him. Shortly following their escape, they're again forced into battle, this time against Mitsu's army. But it doesn't go on for too long, as she realizes that they're allies of Mikey, who they don't see as an enemy. So they all travel back to her village together, which is now under attack by Walker and his men. Thanks to the turtles' help though, they manage to gain the upper hand against their enemies and force them to flee. But the destruction caused by Walker's ambush has left Mitsu's younger brother, Yoshi, trapped in a burning building. So Mikey runs inside and manages to save his life. Walker, meanwhile, meets back up with Norinaga and informs him of the demons he'd come across during his attack, leading Norinaga to reveal an illustration of 4 demons that resembled turtles who old priests say had once defeated his ancestors. So he, believing they've now come back for him, finally agrees to Walker's price and makes the exchange for his weaponry. The turtles though, now again in possession of the scepter, plan on using it to return home. But after spending some time in the village and growing a connection with its people, in particular with Mikey building a friendship with Mitsu and Raph bonding with Yoshi, they decide to stay a bit longer to help them fight Walker and Norinaga. So they then ambush them at Norinaga's castle and eventually manage to trap the daimyo inside a bell, which then prompts Walker, upon realizing his forces are outmatched, to try and make a run for it with the scepter. But he doesn't get too far before being surrounded by the turtles, so he attempts to distract them by tossing the scepter into the air. But this ultimately doesn't prevent his defeat, as they still manage to catch it while Wit launches a fireball via catapult at him, resulting in Walker falling off the dock and to his death. With the days saved, the turtles prepare to return home, although it doesn't seem Mikey or Raph want to, as they've come to like living here with their appreciated more than hiding in the sewers. But they're ultimately convinced by Mitsu to return to their time, so after saying their goodbyes to her and Yoshi, the team uses the scepter to travel back to the present, in turn returning Kenshin and the 4 honor guards back to their time as well, where Kenshin gets to share a long-awaited kiss with Mitsu. Michelangelo still seems a bit bummed out about them having to leave though, but his spirits are soon raised thanks to the efforts of Splinter and his brothers, who dance alongside him as the trilogy ends. And that was our recap of the 90s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles trilogy. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful in any way, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We'll be coming out with more TMNT content soon also, so be on the lookout for that. But once again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.